Some of you know I teach a class here in the summer called Book Arts and Letterpress. It's a class about making books. It's an art studio class, technically, but in addition to hours and hours in the studio, we spend a lot of time reading and a lot of time watching films. Sometimes those films have a connection to the class in terms of content. The film Helvetica, for example, is more or less about the history of typographic design in the 20th century. But we also watch a few films about music. Why films and why music in a class about making books? Films and music and books are all structural, temporal arts. They exist in time, can only be experienced over time, and in that time they utilize text, language, texture, shape, color, and rhythm. We watch films and listen to music not just for their content, but to analyze and to think through the aesthetics of structure, and to use them as models to break out of or complicate the text-laden page after exact page form of the traditional book. So tonight we have a lecture by two people, two artists that work with 4D structures. Bruce Willen, a graphic designer and musician, and Gabriel DeLoach, a photographer and filmmaker. They each really do amazing individual work, and they have also collaborated on a number of projects. I show their work to my students frequently, in class context and out, and they're going to share that work with you and explain it better than I can. They're also going to, maybe explicitly, but probably not, tell you about the making of books in a way that's different from what we usually expect. About each of our speakers. Gabriel DeLoach was born and raised in northern Appalachia country by an ex-NSA radio intelligencer and a stock car driver / equestrian. After receiving his BFA in photography in 2001 from Baltimore's Maryland Institute College of Art and dropping out of the College of the Atlantic's graduate philosophy program, DeLoach spent 6 or 7 years as an itinerant student of multiple grinds. Dairy farmer, dock hand, large format portrait photographer, carpenter, mason, and timber framer, vagabonding for a living before turning to filmmaking full time. He got his legs as a field assistant to National Geographic photographer Steve Winter, and subsequently settled in Charlottesville, where he founded Folk Hero during the making of his first documentary, The Harvest. Gabriel's work has taken him across the mountains and floodplains of northeast India, the jungles of Sumatra and Thailand, and the Pantanal wetlands of Brazil. Most recently, Gabriel joined the photo and film faculty at VCU in Richmond, Virginia as an adjunct professor. Bruce Willen is a principal and founding partner of Post Typography, a Baltimore-based creative studio specializing in graphic design, illustration, custom lettering, and conceptual typography with additional forays into art, apparel, music, curatorial work, and design theory. With over a dozen years of professional experience in design, writing, photography, and pun making, Bruce has led projects ranging from major branding campaigns to punk band t-shirt designs, approaching each with the same obsessive attention to detail. A graduate of and faculty member at MICA, Bruce is also a frequent gardener and contributor to Baltimore's art and music scene with his band, Peels. Since co-founding Post Typography with Nolan Strauss in 2007, Bruce has developed concepts and led the studio on major branding and advertising campaigns and other projects for clients, including the New York Times, U.S. Green Building Council, John Legend and the Roots, and Random House. Bruce's design work has received numerous awards and has been featured in such books as Ellen Lupton's Graphic Design, The New Basics, Fight On to Area 2, and Tashin's Contemporary Graphic Design, as well as a monograph by European publisher Pyramid Editions. With Nolan Strauss, Willen co-authored and designed Lettering and Type, Creating Letters and Designing Typefaces from Princeton Architectural Press. So, if you could all join me in welcoming Bruce and Gabe.
Thanks, Aaron, for the great introduction. And yeah, thanks also for setting all this up, inviting us out here to speak. And also a big thanks to Demetria for helping set this up, filming and carting our lazy boats around town. So I'm Bruce of Post Typography.
And I'm Gabe, Book Hero.
And we're not going to talk back and forth like this the whole time. And we should also mention that we have two frequent collaborators and partners that we work with, one of whom Nolan Strauss in the middle was supposed to be here today, but unfortunately, it's been, as you may have heard, it's been pretty icy in Baltimore, and Nolan fell and broke his ankle, so wasn't able to join us. He's bummed out, but he says, "What's up?" So, Gabe and I are going to talk a little bit about the collaborative process, not only with our partners in crime, but also with each other. And
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Bruce. So, working on this talk, we decided we actually had a lot in common. And in case you can't recognize it, that's me. In high school, circa 1997, performing experimental sing-song, poetry, music, very poorly. And in that same realm, I also published a zine in high school called The Dragon's Blood, which had nothing to do with dragons or dwarves or elves, but actually was taken from a Max Ernst book that was given to me by my middle school art teacher, and inspired this concept of creating an art game with my friends. And so we put this zine together for about 2 years, and we published it ourselves. And this is actually one of the articles about inmates on death row in a series called Not Dead Yet, and where we ask questions like Jello or pudding or have you seen Dead Man Walking, all of which were answered in earnest. And the zine was actually pretty popular. We held a lot of poetry readings and acquired a lot of submissions, but it was not popular with my high school principal, Dr. Miller. And she called me into her office one day and held the zine up in her hand and just dropped it in the trash and told me she never wanted to see this effing garbage in her school again. But we continued to publish it until I went to college.
Yeah, so we just recently in the past couple weeks discovered that we both made these zines in high school. I made one with my frequent partner in crime and mischief maker, Jeremy, with bad 90s fashion sense. And so while Gabe's zine had some artistic aspirations and merit to it, ours consisted mainly of these silly photocopies with dumb captions and a lot of your mom jokes. And similarly to Gabe, we also got in trouble for publishing our zine. I think in our case a little bit more for, not so much for the PG-13 content of the zine, but a little bit more because we had used the photocopier in the teacher's lounge and distributed copies in all the lockers in our high school for several weeks running. But even dumb ideas rarely happen in a vacuum. And especially even like more interesting ideas, such as cubism, a lot of collaboration is involved. And Picasso didn't invent cubism on his own. He was working very closely with George Braque. And even their rivalry with Matisse contributed to this art movement that was extremely influential. And this is something, this sort of idea of the power of collaboration is something that has been gaining a lot more recognition recently. There's a really interesting book by Joshua Wolfshank called The Powers of Two that kind of debunks this idea of the romantic solitary genius.
So, continuing the topic of collaboration, I carried my habits of collaboration into college. Up on the right, that's my dear friend John Sheridan, and we shared an interest in night photography together. So we spent about a year traveling around at night, taking pictures, like this one. And then I went to Ireland for study abroad, and continued photographing at night, while John, back in Baltimore, was doing his thing. And we had a pretty successful exhibition. And then 2 years later or so, John continued this concept and created another body of work called Residual, which was pretty successful and kind of helped catapult his career as a photographer.
So, given our mutual history, it was sort of natural that when Gabe and I met in college, we first collaborated on a zine that I was publishing called Star Charts. And Gabe and John contributed photography for this feature spread in the magazine that included a lot of their night work. And like most zines, I only published one issue. But it's sort of, I was really interested in both photography, typography, and design at the time. And this kind of DIY background really informed my interest in design and led to, eventually many years later, starting a design studio based in Baltimore called Post Typography, which Aaron talked a little bit about earlier. But, so to kind of give you a little bit of background on Post Typography, I need to talk a little bit about League of Death. This was the metal band that my frequent collaborator Nolan Strauss and I started together in college. And this is the logo for League of Death, which if you look closely at it, you can see that the words League of Death are hidden inside this evil goat skull looking thing. And the logo is way more cool and metal than the band ever was. But League of Death really provided this opportunity for us to start working together, and I was actually just talking with Gabe a minute ago before the lecture about how I feel like neither Nolan and I would have become the sort of artists and designers that we are today without working with each other for over a dozen years. This poster is kind of the conception, if you will, of Post Typography. Nolan was working at the Mica mailroom at the time, and we'd snuck in the middle of the night so that we could download gay porn on his boss's computer and make free photocopies. And find just the right dongs for this poster. And Nolan and I were both screen printing concert posters while we were in college, and this was where we had first collaborated creatively, both with League of Death and for other local and out-of-town shows. And what drew us to each other's work was that it had this kind of conceptual bent, or a lot of the posters did, such as this one that was screen printed onto mirrored paper. And since we were printing all of our own posters, we were able to experiment with these different printing techniques and substrates. For this one, which was a tour by 4 Baltimore bands, we bought a stack of shooting targets from a hunting supply store and screen printed on top of them, kind of poking fun at Baltimore's violent reputation, as seen on The Wire. And this concert poster work eventually led us to other design projects for local organizations and art galleries, such as this one for a show called Home, where we rearranged a set of bookshelves to spell the word home. For another art exhibition that involved artist proposals for the reuse of vacant space in Baltimore, we were inspired by dilapidated signage, like on the previous slide, and we created this logo where all of the counterforms had fallen from the letters. But sort of taking the spirit of the exhibition to heart, we then reanimated all of the counterforms to create these secondary icons for the exhibition. And in 2007, we started Post Typography as a full-time design studio. And so as our work began to get noticed, we began doing higher profile projects, such as these editorial illustrations for the New York Times, Time magazine, a lot of other publications as well. This is a cover that we designed a few years ago for ESPN's Best in Sports issue. And like a lot of editorial work, we had an extremely tight deadline. So we had about 3 days to photograph hundreds of sports balls, collage them together to form the words Best in Sports for the cover. And kind of as the second half of our name implies, Post Typography does a lot of custom lettering and typographic work. And this often takes the form of lettering-based illustrations, such as these. This was for a book review of a Steven Pinker book in Wired magazine. And since the sort of thesis of the book was that cursing is hardwired into the human brain, we hid all these 4-letter words in this pink lobes. This is another lettering or typographic illustration for Fast Company magazine, where we actually grew the word May using grass seeds and photographed it over a period of several weeks, as you can see in this time lapse. And the grass eventually died after my cat decided to start sleeping on it. So at Post Typography, like our client list and the type of work that we do is pretty diverse, and it really varies from week Sometimes we're working on book covers for fiction or nonfiction. Other times we might be doing logos or an icon design, such as these that we did recently for Washington Post, for sort of redesign of their Sunday magazine. And all of these icons accompany different recurring features in the magazine. We still do some music work as well. Often it's more packaging work. This is an album or an EP cover we designed for Future Islands. And usually these projects are for independent bands and labels, but every once in a while we get the opportunity to work on a big project for a major label as well. But most of the work in our studios, it's generally these more kind of complex multi-part projects, such as doing these identity branding projects for the Greenbuild Conference, which is the largest expo on sustainable building and architecture in the world. And these projects, or the Greenbuild work, it encompasses doing these logos, branding, illustration, ad campaigns, sometimes posters and graphics, printed pieces like this mailer, and even smaller elements such as hotel key cards, buttons. Occasionally we get to extend identity into the 3D realm, such as doing apparel. This was this cube-like conference bag that we designed and had custom manufactured with these different colored fabric panels. And we even were able to work with the trade show fabricator, and they helped us take this identity into 3 dimensions to do this site furniture and structures. This is another graphic identity that we did recently for MICA's Center for Career Development. It's this kind of flexible identity that's based around this kit of parts, this idea of this line extending from a dot. But since it's an art school and an artist's career path is rarely a straight line from point A to point B, we let it get a little bit creative. And we created this icon set for the Career Development Center to use. And the reason for doing this, it wasn't merely just to create something that's this sort of weird and fun identity, but the Career Development Center creates all these different applications throughout the year. And we wanted to give them this real kit of parts that they could use. Because a lot of these different designs that are being done in-house by career development staff or their interns. And we wanted it to be something that could grow and change over the years and wouldn't become stale after just a couple of years. And we were even able to take it into 3 dimensions. They had this super depressing concrete stairwell that led up to the Career Development Center. And to make it feel less like you were going to prison, we did these graphics all over the walls. Environmental graphics and design is something that we've been a little more involved in the past few years. This is a room that we designed at the Baltimore Museum of Art. That's this educational space that helps visitors think about how contemporary artists use text in their artwork. And Post Typography not only came up with the concept and design of this room, but we also helped create interactive activities working with the education department at the museum that would engage museum visitors in school groups. And the theme of the room was realized through this kind of room-sized infographic. We illustrated with these different pieces that we designed with the same words, but in these very different contexts that give a sense about how contemporary artists have these different approaches to creating text-based artwork. So, while Post Typography still designs posters, these days it's more frequently for independent films, such as the acclaimed documentary 12 O'Clock Boys, about these crews of illegal dirt bike riders in Baltimore. And arts organizations such as the Maryland Film Festival. It's this really amazing small film festival based in Baltimore. It's actually one of the best film festivals in the United States. This is a poster we did for a special Maryland Film Festival screening of the Bill Murray classic Groundhog Day. And we created this portrait of Bill Murray that's made from thousands of tiny Bill Murrays, representing the theme of the film. If you haven't seen it, it's an amazing movie. It's so good. And before we started working for the Maryland Film Festival, Nolan and I first started collaborating early on while we were in college doing posters for the Johns Hopkins Film Fest, which is a sort of underground film fest based in Baltimore. And these posters taken really varied forms throughout the years. This is this 3D mutant Baltimore rat attacking this tower of typography. And these all came with a set of 3D glasses attached. And the festival has been really supportive of us really experimenting with the format of the poster as well, such as this one, which was perforated into these 32 separate panels, so that it be deconstructed to form this flip book, and kind of becoming this example of the time-based media that's being screened at the festival. And this is roughly what the flip book animation looks like. We take different approaches to the festival each year. This year we were inspired by Johns Hopkins fraternity culture. We took the classic red solo cup of keg party fame, and we turned it into a working zoetrope. And the poster actually contained instructions and sample animation so that you could build your own broetrope. As you can see here. Yes, that's a puking frat boy. And then for this poster, we were sort of inspired by the rise of internet video and like new media. And we turned the poster into a real-life media player with this die-cut window in the center. So depending on where you hang it, you can see how cool everything is IRL. So Nolan's and my collaborative work has extended beyond the realm of post-typography and traditional graphic design into a lot of other projects, including stuff like this digital printed wall covering that we did a few years ago, that from a distance it looks like this very traditional large-scale floral print. But when you get up close, you can see that all the flowers are made from these cartoon explosions, bombs going off, shrapnel, bullets flying, and kind of exploring these themes of this sort of undercurrent of violence in American society. And another piece that we did, which is this edition of these 5 engraved baseball bats, that kind of explores similar themes, as well as imperialism, racism in baseball. Nolan and I also team teach a class together called Experimental Lettering and Type at MICA. And this class became the basis for a book, the book that Aaron mentioned in the introduction, called Lettering and Type. And working on this book together really pushed us outside of our comfort zones and forced us to collaborate in a new and really exciting kind of way. And think about how we could put some of these practices that we'd observed in our own work into words, as well as curating really interesting examples of cool lettering and typography to use examples in the book. And also getting to interview and include work by some of our colleagues and design heroes as well. And now I'm going to turn it over to Mr. DeLoach. He's going to give you a little background about how he got there.
That's me. Yeah, I took a much different path than Bruce and Nolan. Before my existential crisis, my dad raised me around cameras. He was a photographer. And he documented every aspect of our lives growing up. And then one day I turned the camera on him and started photographing him. And I knew that I was kind of a born storyteller. And then in 2005, after I had spent a couple of years already vagabonding around, my dad passed away. And in that time, I had walked aimlessly around zoos and Midwestern door auctions. And at one point, I thought I would make money by photographing family portraits. But that was also kind of a failure. And I built an 8x10 bellows camera at one point, and I got a pseudo job at a photography store where I fixed 35mm cameras in the back in exchange for 8x10 film, which I took these pictures with. So really I was just working on my formal skills, exploring color and shape. And then kind of embarked on my existential crisis to Naknek, Alaska. I took a camera with me with about 100 feet of film and a bulk loader. And I thought, while I was making money working on a fishing dock, maybe I could actually do a documentary story about the fishing industry. But since most of my time was spent on a forklift, that's where I had to take my pictures. They turned out okay. And also when the tide was down and tender boats were stranded, I had a couple minutes to take a few snaps. Walked around town making new friends. But in the end, I never finished my story. I kind of moved on to a new experience. I left Naknek. And about a year later, I traveled down to Mississippi, right after Hurricane Katrina, and to help with relief, building shelters. And of course, I brought my camera with me with the full intention of maybe finally telling a complete story with my camera. And I also brought an audio recorder and spent a couple weeks recording interviews with people who were displaced from their homes, as well as building shelters for families like this one. But near the end of my trip, I left my audio recorder in a bar tent, actually, and never recovered it and lost all my interviews. So, deterred by my inability to tell a story, I gave up my passion of photography and decided to just follow carpentry and timber framing full time. So I got a job building a timber frame cabin outside of Charlottesville on Fox Mountain, and acquired some help from friends for good old-fashioned barn raising. That's actually John Sheridan, my collaborator from college in the center there, came out to help. And at this point I realized I really loved timber framing. I thought I was really good at it, and I thought it was my path for the rest of my life. But then one day, the primaries came around and John called me up and said, let's go to New Hampshire. That's me up there on the right with a 4x5 camera in a mob of press, trying to photograph John Edwards. It was such a naive idea. So the 4x5 didn't really work out, and I pulled out the 35 and took a bunch of pictures. But again, I never really completed my story about the New Hampshire primary, and went back home without a complete story. I just sucked at telling complete stories. But through persistence and deciding that I wanted to get back into photography, I got hooked up with this guy on the left, Steve Winter, National Geographic photographer, and all 30 bags that he came with that I had the privilege of packing for him before every trip. So on my first trip with Steve, we traveled to Northeast India, Kaziranga, which is a little wildlife heritage site. Kind of the last stronghold for rhinos and elephants and tigers in India. But poaching's a huge problem there, and Steve set out to go photograph it and tell that story in a National Geographic article. These are some of his pictures. Those are wildlife guards standing guard. And that's Steve setting up a camera trap. Steve's really famous for his camera trap pictures. They're triggered by an infrared beam. When we set them up with like elaborate lighting systems and transmitter, and when the animal walks through, we take its picture, kind of like this one here. This is actually the first camera trap picture I took with Steve. We set it up on a poached rhino, but as you can see, the lighting's really ugly, and of course, Steve blamed that on me. This is a rhino that died giving birth, and we knew a tiger was going to come up to it. So we set up a camera trap and tried to make the lighting a little bit better this time. And we set camera traps up in trees, where we would find trees that tigers were actually scratching, and we set them up there. But getting a good picture was like 1 in a million chance. We'd spend months, and we'd even leave the cameras over a long period of time. We'd leave India and come back and check them, and finally it paid off. And this is Happy Tiger. This is the image that led off the story in 2011 issue that Steve had. So tigers weren't really the only focus in our story. We also wanted to capture a lot of other wildlife. And one day Steve got the idea that he wanted to get a really intimate portrait of a one-horned rhino. And the only way to do that was by taking an elephant up to a one-horned rhino, because rhinos aren't supposed to be scared of elephants. And so we got a bamboo pole, a 10-foot bamboo pole, and we attached the camera to the bottom of it with a remote trigger. And Steve sat on top of the rhino, I sat behind him, and our assistant would put the pole down on the ground, and Steve would take pictures when we got up to the rhino. So this rhino we were trying to get pretty close to, and that's my photo of the camouflage. Those are the best sneakers ever. And then the rhino got pissed and attacked us. And I tried to keep the camera steady. I was shooting a little point and shoot, and when it goes black, you can see my card got full. And as we're being chased through the prairie, I'm actually trying to delete footage that I had shot of trees and shit, and turn the camera back around. And finally, I got enough footage and I gave up, and I yelled for the bamboo pole from the assistant. He passed it to me. I passed it back to the guard. The guard started jabbing the rhino in the face, and eventually it gave up. So we got chased by rhinos a lot. But I also got one of my own pictures published in the magazine, though Steve will never do that before. And then sometimes we had a little break for a respite in between spending days in the park, and that's when I took the opportunity to work on my skills as a photographer. And I started using a flash, which I had never incorporated in my work before. And would just walk around taking pictures in the towns that we visited. Sardine can. And in between jobs with Steve, I'd go back to Charlottesville and try to make money other ways. And a lot of times people would ask me to photograph events, but usually I would turn them down because I didn't want to be an event photographer, but I couldn't pass this opportunity up. This lady was throwing her own birthday party that was redneck themed. She called it Coup Rouge, and it attracted all the high affluent of Charlottesville. This is actually Patricia Kluge, who sold her winery to Donald Trump a few years ago after going bankrupt. And this lady on the right obviously didn't get the memo. And I just love the juxtaposition of, I hate the word juxtaposition, of this wealth and these really silly games that they were playing with Budweiser, like Flip Cup, and racing inflatable Formula One cars. But again, I kind of walked away with an incomplete story. And around this time, I started Folk Hero Films, and was traveling around the world working for nonprofits in conservation, just documenting their efforts in the field. And one of those jobs sent me to Indonesia for 2 months to cover the impact of logging the palm oil industry that was had on the tiger population there. And before I went into the field, my client was sent these images of a tiger cub trapped in a snare. And they really wanted me to cover this conflict for them. They were hoping that when I got there, I would see the same thing. But kind of fortunately, I didn't see anything like this, unfortunately for my client. But I had about the same amount of luck as this poor tiger did. He's in a zoo now. I got to meet him. So around the same time, I started my first documentary feature, The Harvest. I first discovered Tina Pattison in Hunt of a Lifetime in 2001 when I was still in college, and I was fascinated with this organization that was kind of like Make-A-Wish, but instead of granting normal wishes like going to Disney World or hanging out with an athlete, these kids wanted to go on hunts for their last wish, which I found really ironic and kind of disturbing at first. And I had a hard time getting past the irony, but I knew in order to justify the story, to tell it well, to tell it in a diplomatic fashion, I had to give the subject matter a place, a voice. to provide us a reason for why they were doing what they were doing. And about 7 years later, after I was done with my crisis and meandering around, I started the film. But not without the help of others. This is my girlfriend, Kirsten. I couldn't have made the film without her. I taught her how to run sound, and she accompanied me on a lot of the trips, but not the hunts, because she would have cried a whole lot when the animals got shot. So I had to do those on my own. But it turned out to be quite an impressive story, kind of where life and death meet, and a journey for these kids where they lose their innocence in the forest. So we'll watch a little trailer if you guys don't mind.
So where are we going?
To Maine.
Why are we going to Maine to hunt a bear?
Because I got a hunt from Hunt Lifetime.
You gonna hunt a bear like that one on your bed?
Not quite.
Not
Not
quite?
like that one up there.
More like which one?
The one on the wall.
He's over there. I found a bear.
Scary.
I really want to get a Miriam turkey because I think they're pretty. Which I've never seen them, but my mom says they're pretty. Oh my god.
She came out angry at the world, needed no assistance whatsoever. She didn't need the breathing tube or anything. It was obvious from, I think, that minute on that Bill and I knew we had a little fighter.
Right a little bit.
I'm going on a hunt to New Mexico through Hunt of a Lifetime, and Hunt of a Lifetime bought me a Savage 300 short mag to go on the hunt. Just because I'm blind doesn't mean I shouldn't get good grades, or doesn't mean I can't still play sports. People don't always use common sense and realize just because I can't see doesn't mean my brain doesn't work.
The MRI showed he had a brain tumor the size of a lemon. He sure ain't missing out on anything. He wants to do whatever anybody else wants to do, and he really loves to be independent.
Is Tyler excited about being in camp, huh, Ty? Well, look this way.
They can't keep food down, then they're sick and they don't feel good, and they're poking them with needles constantly. It makes you want to just sit there and cry. It's just unreal.
Because Jesus died on the cross for us and stuff, we can be healed and made whole one day. He has the power to heal us whenever.
When I tell you to squeeze, okay? Do it now, buddy.
Here's the hopefully lucky shell. Gotta go down there and find out whether it really was lucky or not. But 140 grains of bullet traveling at 2,285 feet a second. Ought to do some damage downrange when it's only 40 yards.
So it was like around the time that Gabe was working on The Harvest that he reconnected with me, and I hadn't really talked to him since college. And he wanted to know if post-typography could help him do some design work, including the title sequence for the film. And so he was showing us these clips, and it was obvious right away that this film is this pretty complicated subject matter. Weird and complicated. And it really challenged, like, sort of challenging to your perceptions of hunting, whether or not you are opposed to hunting or not. And so when we were looking at some of these clips that Gabe was sharing with us, we were really thinking about how different this idea of hunting in The Harvest is from these kind of historical representations of the hunt. And as being kind of struck by this contrast between this ideal of the noble hunts and this film's more messy reality, we wanted to kind of accentuate that by using these hunting scenes from classical paintings for the title sequence. And for the project, we started looking at hundreds of old master paintings, which we began trying to figure out which ones we could obtain photographs or high-res images of and get the rights to. And then this was the one that we all felt kind of captured this real classical ideal of hunting. And it's based in the Louvre, and through some connections, Gabe was able to get us high-res images of it, which we were then able to use for the title sequence, which is here.
So keeping in mind the spirit of collaboration, we also hired a really old and dear friend of mine, Brian Waller, to compose the music, which he did kind of effortlessly while also getting his master's in composition last semester in grad school. And he wound up composing the music for the entire film in about 2 months.
And the song really kind of set the tone for the title sequence and helped us then kind of figure out the pacing and also what images to use as well. And as you can see, kind of the sort of brutality and level of intensity build up throughout the title sequence.
And I finally completed a story. Just want to say thank you.
So through working with Gabe on The Harvest, we sort of reconnected with him, and when Post Typography got approached a couple years ago by this company that does inlay work for the musical instrument industry, we thought of Gabe and wanted to work with him on this project because ProWorks does this really incredible detailed work, but they wanted us to create this website and they had no imagery of it, like no photography. And how can we tell their story without photography? So since we knew Gabe was interested in sort of talking about some of these, talking about weird jobs and obscure subcultures, we brought him in to do this pretty intensive photo shoot in the ProWorks factory, as well as some of their really insane inlay projects. That's a double neck guitar with a dragon on it. And we kind of set up this makeshift studio and got this, Gabe did this really beautiful macro photography that really celebrated what they do and captured the work in a way that I think wouldn't have been possible otherwise. And when we were designing the website, we wanted to let the work really speak for itself and let these photos kind of tell the story and not overdo it with the design. Give it a little bit of character, but let the work do the talking. And while we were working on this this 3 or 4 day photo shoot, I had asked them, ProWorks, ahead of time, okay, so you're gonna have all the guitars cleaned, restrung, ready to photograph. And of course, when we showed up, none of this had been done. We had these guitars that had been sitting in these cases for 10 years, had these rusty old strings. And some of these musical instruments are worth $50,000 or $60,000. They're one of a kind or an edition of 10. And so I'm sweating bullets trying to restring this guitar that's worth more money than I make in a year, and freaking out that I'm going to drop it. And luckily I didn't. But ultimately, it turned out it was another great collaborative project that we were all really happy with. And so speaking of music, as Erin mentioned earlier, outside of my other collaborations with Nolan and designers in Post Typography, I continue to play music in a group called Peels. And Peels is kind of the exact opposite of League of Death. It's instrumental, atmospheric, but pretty introspective, something you listen to like while you're laying in bed at night. And one thing that I've kind of learned playing music with other people over the years is that when people from these different sort of backgrounds and approaches and have a different, like, diverse inspirations get together, you kind of find similarities, but it's really these different perspectives that start to generate these new ideas and create new energy in your work. And sort of like playing with Willen has been like this really, I think, really sort of opening experience for both of us that collaboration really makes happen. And it's also given, Peel's also given me a chance to collaborate with other artist friends, such as photographer Evan Willen, who contributed this work for LP, and Baltimore artist Zoe Friedman, where we recently released an album called Seltzer, where we, like, in addition to on cassette, we released it as this limited edition laser cut that she created that came with a digital download. And our collaboration with Zoe actually first came out of this video installation project that she was doing in the clock room at Baltimore's Broma-Seltzer Tower, where she was doing all these projections on the walls, and she asked us to kind of compose a score to go along with her videos. And as you can see, the clock room looks sort of like a set from the Batman movie. It's really awesome. And working with Zoe on the project was this really incredible experience, because we not only had to, she was working on the animations and the films at the same time that we were writing the music, so we were sort of forced to respond to her work as she was creating it, and which was a very different process for us, and as well as sort of the space itself. And through this collaboration, we all kind of wound up creating something that was completely different and unexpected that I think either one of us could have done on our own. But before there was Peels, there was a band called Double Dagger. So in addition to all the other collaborations that Noel and I have done, we played in a band together for 9 years. Double Dagger was this band that we started after the death of League of Death, post-college. It was originally a concept band that used graphic design metaphors in the lyrics to talk about other, like, bigger subject matter. And we named Double Dagger after the typographic symbol that looks sort of like this. And it's mainly used for footnotes, like on this t-shirt. And while our early songs had titles such as Command X, Command V, and comic book lettering, we gradually evolved beyond these humble origins to talk about other subject matter. And even though Nolan wasn't singing about CMYK anymore, the design influence was still very evident in all of the visual output for Double Dagger. And really, from its early days, the band was very intertwined with our creative process at Typography, and sort of Typography becoming a design studio. Because being in a band sort of helped give us these opportunities to experiment with these different types of work. When you're in a band as a designer, you get to be your own client and create cool album covers and experiment with different album packaging ideas and designs, such as this limited edition LP that we did. And this sort of DIY punk background really influenced the way that we approach design in general. And because when you're in a punk band, you don't have a lot of, like, budgets for a lot of stuff, and you have to work within these sort of design constraints. And even if you're doing, like, a photocopied black and white flyer, like, how can you make it cool and have as much impact as something that, like, a professionally printed poster that some pitchfork band has? And Typography also was able to kind of collaborate with ourselves, I guess, with Double Dagger, having these opportunities for these joint speaking and performance events, such as this one at Harvard University, where we played inside of this weird silver inflatable structure. that got super sweaty after about 5 minutes and started dripping condensation from the ceiling. And so Double Dagger, we decided that we were going to call it quits in 2011, and we were going on our final tour, and we called our buddy Gabe and asked him if he was interested in joining us.
Yeah, so the original idea was to just create a document of the final tour, like a little concert DVD that we would throw in Double Dagger's last album. So I embarked on a 2-week tour with them in a van, very smelly van. And along with the concert footage, I really wanted to capture these intimate moments in the van with these guys, like in between cities. And as you can see from this footage, it was frightfully boring. I really didn't use a fisheye in any other shot of the whole film. So, filming Double Dagger proved to be quite a challenge. That's me. I got tossed around like a piñata, as you can see in this footage. It's so difficult. And then I lost my lens. And it hit the floor, soaked in beer. Focus ring got broken, the glass got smashed, like there was a big dent in the glass, and when I finally got it back onto my camera, I couldn't focus. It's hard to see in the projection, but there's a big aberration in the lower corner of the footage, and I had to shoot the rest of this one performance with a broken lens before we could run to a camera shop, and I bought a $30 used Nikon lens to throw on my body. Yes, terrible challenge. Another challenge was lighting. Actually, you can kind of see. All I had were these 2 lights. We had to be quick setting up for the shows, and I really didn't want to get in the way and be cumbersome, and I didn't want to affect the atmosphere of a Double Dagger experience. So with 2 clamps and these 2 500-watt lights, I had to clamp them to anything I could find and light the space up as best as I could.
So we got back from the tour, or we got done with the tour, and Gabe started sending us some clips that he had begun editing together from some of the tour footage, and we were really blown away by the way that he was cutting these scenes together from all these different performances, but in a really seamless way. And what was really fascinating about it for us is that it was more than just sort of a concert document, but it really, I felt like, captured the experience of being at a punk show in a way that you don't really see in a concert documentary. And sort of as Gabe kept sending us these clips, not only from the shows, but as he was beginning to conduct these sort of like background footage and interviews with other musicians in Baltimore and luminaries in the Baltimore art scene, it really became apparent that what he was capturing in the film was a little bit bigger than just about Double Dagger. That it really was talking more about the Baltimore music scene in general. And even more than that, this whole idea of like what it takes to create, foster this really special DIY environment for creating beautiful art and music, as well as weird, uncomfortable stuff. That's a band of Oxes. And the Baltimore art scene it really is I must say, it's this really special place that I've found in very few, or maybe no other cities that I've been to. It's really open, and people are extremely generous. I mean, even your musicians who are nationally really well known, like Future Islands and Dan Deacon, Wyok and Beach House, they're out at shows by their peers in some shitty basement, supporting each other's friends, or supporting their friends, but also being really open to new projects that people are doing. And it's created this environment where people aren't afraid to try new things or collaborate across disciplines, like having someone who does electronic experimental composition play with a drummer from a punk band, and somehow it all makes sense.
So I got back from tour with Double Dagger. This is my partner, Zach, my collaborator with Folk Hero. And Zach had never seen Double Dagger. He didn't know anything about the Baltimore music scene or post-typography, but when I started showing him the footage and telling him about the scene, he kind of flipped his shit and was so interested in what they were doing in the scene that he thought the film really should be a feature. It shouldn't just be a concert film, that we should really dig into what Bruce was talking about this Baltimore music scene and how things were really thriving there. And Zach, I come from kind of a spontaneous, sort of traditional documentary background, and whereas Zach comes from a narrative background, he likes to plan everything out to the T. And together, we decided we really wanted to incorporate something in the film that kind of brought all these story elements together in a very slick, tight, artful way. So we started scripting these scenes through a satirical music critic that we developed and created from Tim Kabara, who...
Yeah, he's sort of the unofficial historian of the Baltimore music scene. He doesn't always wear the brown jacket.
Or carry the portable record player.
And Gabe and Zach, they were really interested in all of these concert flyers, like show flyers that Nolan and I had done over the years for various bands that we've been in and for other people's shows. And they wanted to incorporate this into the film, specifically into the title sequence, to sort of immerse the audience in this like DIY feel. And Gabe's concept was for Nolan and I to design these key cards for the title sequence that looked as if they were these punk flyers. And they had wanted us to use production methods that we would have used during like early days of Double Dagger, such as rub-down lettering and photocopiers.
Yeah, so we first thought, okay, well, let's film the process of cutting and pasting and then the flyer popping out of the photocopier, but as you can see, that's incredibly boring. So we took it to the next level and thought, well, let's try animating the different elements of the flyer. And so this is a rudimentary little test example of what we thought it might turn out to look like. And we were encouraged by this, though it still looked crappy. We realized we had to make it a lot slicker and more beautiful. So I found a used copy stand for about $200 in the local camera shop where I used to repair cameras for film, and set it up in my house and in my office, and also borrowed some stop-motion software.
And so with this new direction, Gabe wanted us to create kind of a kit of parts, these sort of flyer parts from the movie. That's Denny, the drummer from Double Dagger, doing some karate. And we took a bunch of stills and sort of created these flyer parts. And Gabe kept being like, no, we need like more stuff to animate. The Luxury Condos from the Poor was sort of one of Double Dagger's signature songs. And he kept being like, no, like, more stuff, which normally in our flyer design we wouldn't do, but in this case, it kind of worked for the animation purposes.
So this is just a rough example of kind of what the final product would look like after we got them to just jack it up. So something like this would take me probably about 3 hours to make. Just those 2 seconds.
You want to see the final version?
Yeah, you want to see the final version?
Yeah. And so if you want to see the rest of the film beyond these first 2 minutes, it is, as Aaron mentioned, it is screening tomorrow night in the Cornerstone screening room at 7 o'clock.
For 9 years, Double Dagger was a vital part of the Baltimore music and arts underground. In 2011, they decided to call it quits. This is their final tour.
Thanks. And I think we have time to do a short Q&A if anyone has any questions or comments or hate mail.
Don't be shy.
What's your process before creating one of these images or these typographic scenes? What like do you have like when you did the little line thing? I'm just curious. How do you get into that sort of train of thought?
For doing
well, just I don't know.
Or just doing like a design.
Just in general, kind of when you have these ideas, is there a process that you go through, or you kind of just?
Yeah, I mean every project, there's usually some kind of concept behind it. I mean, sometimes it's like a really dumb inside joke that only we get. But I mean, a lot of times it's sort of thinking about the sort of like underlying ideas behind whatever this thing is, whether it's like something that's, for like a book jacket, like getting into the reading the book and trying to visualize some aspect of the sort of feel of the book through the cover. And I don't know, other times where there's some sort of like more complex like editorial illustrations, just trying to kind of distill it in a way that is smart but isn't like gonna like overpower the work or the work itself.
Gabe, could you talk about why The Harvest was the story you actually finished?
Well, I was tired of failure. And working with Steve, I think I was able to really hone my craft as well as kind of push through any sort of obstacle when we spent a lot of time in the field together, and he never gave up on anything. And I was always just very flippant and ready to go to the next interesting thing. I mean, it was just like a moth caught in a headlight. So with The Harvest, I mean, once I started it and I felt like I actually had a real story, I don't know why, but I was so determined to just finish it and actually make something.
I think also that's kind of one of the powers of collaboration is sort of having that other person, or maybe in some cases like a group of other people who are working with you, and in some cases it's the fear of failure, like, oh, I can't let these people down. And in other cases it's just sort of seeing what this person's doing, like, wow, this person really had this great idea for this thing, or like seeing Gabe's like really beautifully shot footage for The Harvest and this very interesting, compelling story that he'd spent months and months, even years working on, was something that made, when we asked us to do the title sequence and other design work, we were like, wow, well, we need to do something that, like, we're not just gonna throw some typography on a screen and call it done. I mean, we really need to sort of add to what he's doing and like do something that's on the caliber of the work that he's done. So I think that kind of back and forth, I mean, even kind of like we talked about the beginning with Picasso and Rock, kind of their back and forth really spurred them on. And I think it's kind of the same way, like when I was talking about the Baltimore music scene, like even like people that I'm not necessarily collaborating with, like other musicians and bands, you go and see someone's show and you're like, wow, this thing that this person just did, this performance they put on is like really powerful and beautiful and like, exciting, and like if they're putting this much thought and effort into what they're doing, like I need to do that. Like I need to take my shit to the next level too.
And I think photography is a very solitary act in many ways, and film does require a lot of collaboration. It requires a team effort, even though it was mostly just me and maybe one or two people working on this film. Like getting Bruce and Nolan in very early on and getting excited about it, getting other people excited about it, kind of gave me the hope that I actually had something worth doing.
Yeah, I also kind of want to add to that is that, I mean, a lot of sort of the earlier work that Post-Typography did, it was just Nolan and I, and over the past few years we've sort of expanded, we've like grown into like a business, and we've like, you know, hired a few designers who work with us who are all like really smart, creative people in their own right, and kind of having this larger group is, it's like sometimes it's more work and it's frustrating, you know, working with more people, but at the same time, like they're bringing these like really like different ideas and energy to a project that we never would have had on our own. Yeah.
What was it like working with a really narrative kind of ahead of time filmmaker? You kind of or maybe like running kind of documentary person? Like what ones worked well and what ones were really sweet?
Well, so that's kind of a loaded question, I guess, or a loaded answer. It's okay. Yeah, I think we didn't really fight too much making the film. We talked a lot, and Zach was bringing something to the table where, like, he came on Folk Hero a couple years ago before we started making this film, and he started bringing something to the table that kind of opened my eyes up and made me realize, like, I need to step back and actually be a little bit more thoughtful about what I'm doing. And through the process of making this film, I think I got better at becoming more of a narrative filmmaker because of him. Though, I mean, we did argue quite a bit, like here and there, about me kind of like jumping in the car and just going and shooting something without a plan would kind of piss him off a little bit. Because I just come home with footage that was kind of useless sometimes. And so now I've really cut that ratio down, and I've actually become a better filmmaker where when I go in the field, you know, I'm really only shooting almost exactly what I need and coming home with very little scrap. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, I think one of the hardest parts of collaboration is listening to someone, to the person or the people you're working with, no matter how wrong you think they are, and actually like really internalizing what they say. Because I mean, a lot of times, even like working on some of the title sequences with Gabe would say, no, I don't like that painting, or you guys need to do this other thing with the flyer, and Nolan are like, oh man, that painting was perfect. So we're like ranting about it, and then you know, like in the end, like you sort of like, okay, I see what Gabe is coming from, and sort of like creating these sequences and ideas, and it's like, you know, maybe on some level. Yeah.
You guys both did zines when you were in high school. Do you have an opinion on zines in 2015?
I wish I had an opinion. I haven't read a zine in years. So yeah, I'd love to make another one maybe.
Yeah, I kind of have a mixed opinion about contemporary zines, honestly. I think there's a lot of really interesting zines that are like doing something like, and especially with the sort of advent of all these like better production technologies and people being able to use like design software, and like are able to do things that are, you know, rival what, like sort of on the sort of superficial level at least, rival what would have taken like these huge budgets like 15 or 20 years ago. And I think that's really exciting, and people are doing a lot of really amazing things with that. At the same time, I also feel like there's this sort of very navel-gazing trend in zines to doing these very like, I don't necessarily just want to say like pretentious, but just sort of like work that I feel like is kind of boring and is maybe too much of like a niche focus that doesn't really give people as much of a room to get into the sort of subcultures that I think zines are really good at capturing. Some of them do, some of them don't. I'm not really sort of an expert on or super familiar with everything that's going on in contemporary zine culture, but I think there are some really cool stuff that I've seen, but I've also been seeing a lot more really boring zines recently, which, I mean, I guess there are a lot of boring zines, but...
I think that comes with the territory of zine making, though.
Yeah, I don't know, so maybe it hasn't changed. They're just
It's just more, like anything else, it's just more prolific. We have a lot more zines, we have a lot more photographers, a lot more filmmakers.
Yeah, there's just more of them, and they're using nicer fonts now.
Yeah.
Anyone else? We do one.
Yeah.
If anyone or 0 or. Yeah.
Outside of the work that you guys do for arts organizations and things like that you do for more corporate and business clients, what do you try to do to keep it fresh when you're working for businesses?
Well, I think when Post Typography is doing work for more kind of corporate, institutional clients, even the U.S. Green Building Council, I mean, I think we always try and do something that's sort of appropriate for the client. I think we could easily be like, oh yeah, we're gonna do this really fucking crazy website with all his vibrating colors and stuff, and if it's some nonprofit, it would be a really outrageous website for a nonprofit, but it would also be a terrible website for a nonprofit, possibly. So I think we try and always be very sensitive to the context of whatever we're doing, and because context is the most important thing, no matter what kind of art you're making. So I think that sort of the different contexts of the work that we do in Post Typography is what keeps it sort of fresh and interesting for us. And when we're given an opportunity to within those contexts sort of push people a little bit out of their comfort zone, but I mean not so much that it's a dumb idea or that we're just trying to be egotistical about it. And I think that I guess is the way that we try and keep it fresh. And I mean, I guess as much as we can sort of let ourselves experiment a little bit within those contexts.
It's different for us because we usually have clients that have kind of lower expectations because we make a lot of films for nonprofits, and I don't know if you've seen many nonprofit films, but they're usually very poorly produced. So the bar is already set pretty low, but that also means that the money is very low, and what we do is kind of high end, and we expect a bigger paycheck at the end. So just getting our clients to pay a little bit more money for a higher quality piece of work is more of a struggle than making something that's unique and catered toward their voice or whatever it is that their project is.
Yeah, I think that's sort of always the challenge when you're trying to make work that you get really excited about. It often takes way more time than the budget allows, and you have to. I mean, that's something that we're really struggling with, and every day at Post Typography is how can we afford to do something that we're happy with and is going to be this really great end result when the client generally doesn't have that much money to do it. And so I think it's just a balancing act, trying to do as much work or do the best work you can without going to the poorhouse.
Yeah. I don't know about you, but
life of an artist, right?
Yeah, I mean, we always try to go above and beyond no matter what, and which usually means our better halves suffer because of it, or you don't get any sleep and you never go home, and you wind up just working a whole bunch just to make something as good as you can make it, even though maybe they're not paying for it or they won't appreciate it.
Yeah, and all your friends are like, man, you guys are doing work for New York Times, all these big clients. You must be rolling in the money. And not really.
Yeah.
No, but the life of the designer, it's not a lucrative profession.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, don't be an artist. Thank you all so much for being patient and sitting through all this yammering on. And definitely please come tomorrow night and see Gabe and Zach's movie. It's really awesome.
And we'll linger for a couple minutes